Hey, it's Robbie. So, Wednesday. I want you to know that I woke up on Wednesday morning with a very clear, very specific plan. The plan was simple. Maya was coming to the office for lunch. I was going to introduce her to my colleagues, professionally, briefly, the way you do when someone visits your workplace. I was going to keep lunch light and easy and completely free of anything Maya could use against me. And then I was going to come back to the office, sit down at my desk, and continue being a completely normal person who was focused on her career and her campaign and her perfectly fine life. That was the plan. I got up 40 minutes early to do my hair. Maya and I have been friends since we were 13 years old. 11 years. She was there when I got my first job. She was there when I started dating Daniel. She was there for every version of me I have ever been. And she has never once, not once in 11 years, failed to notice something I was trying to hide. I don't know why I thought Wednesday was going to be different. I was at my desk by 7:15. Lara came in at 7:20. Different blazer today. Deep burgundy, which I noticed because I notice things now apparently. That is just something that happens to me now. And she said good morning, which she had never done before, and I said good morning back, and we both looked at our screens and said nothing else. It was the most loaded good morning of my entire professional career. Maya arrived at 12:01, 1 minute after 12. She is never late, and she is never exactly on time. She arrives at 12:01 because she thinks it makes her look spontaneous. It does not. It makes her look like someone who left at exactly the right time and walked slightly slower on purpose. I met her in the lobby. She took one look at me and said, before I could say anything, before I could even say hello, "You did your hair." I said, "I always do my hair." She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "Okay." And that okay contained 11 years of knowing me, and I felt it land somewhere in my chest like a small, precise warning. I had a plan for the office tour. Quick, efficient, past the conference room, past Marcus's office, brief stop at my desk. "Hi, this is where I work. Yes, it's nice. Yes, the view is great." And then straight to the elevator and out to lunch. That was the plan. We were almost at my desk when Marcus came out of his office and said, because the universe continues to have a sense of humor, he said, "Robbie, Lara was looking for you." I stopped. Maya did not stop. Maya slowed down just slightly and tilted her head at approximately the angle of a person who has just heard a name they find interesting. I said, "I'll find her after lunch." Marcus said, "She's at the shared desk." Maya said, "Oh, you share a desk?" Her voice was perfectly casual, perfectly warm, completely weaponized. I said, "It's temporary for the campaign." She said, "Right." There it was again, that right. That okay and right that she had been deploying since we were teenagers, and that meant she had already filed something away and would be returning to it at a time of her choosing. Lara was at the desk when we got there. She was on the phone, a client call from the sound of it, professional and precise. That voice she used that made everything sound like it had already been decided. She looked up when we approached and held up one finger. One moment. And I stood there with Maya beside me and watched Lara finish her call with the kind of composed authority that made the entire room feel like it belonged to her. She hung up. She looked at Maya. She said, "Hi, I'm Lara." Maya said, "Maya, I've heard a lot about you." I said, "I've never said anything about you." Maya looked at me with the smile of someone who knows exactly what they just did. Lara looked at me with an expression I could not read. And then, and I want you to understand that this took approximately 30 seconds total. Maya looked at Lara, and then looked at me, and then looked back at Lara, and something in her face settled into a very specific kind of quiet that I recognized immediately as the quiet of someone who has just understood something completely. 30 seconds. 11 years of friendship and 30 seconds, and she knew. She didn't say anything. That was the worst part. She just smiled at Lara, warm and genuine, the smile she gave people she had decided she liked, and said it was nice to meet her, and that we were heading to lunch, and that she hoped the campaign was going well. Lara said, "It is. Robbie's been invaluable." I looked at Lara. She was already looking back at her laptop. Maya looked at me. I looked at my shoes. We left. The restaurant was 3 blocks from the office. Small, quiet, the kind of place with good food and small tables and absolutely nowhere to hide from your best friend of 11 years. We ordered. We got our drinks. Maya rearranged her napkin in her lap the way she did when she was organizing her thoughts. I waited. She asked about the campaign. I talked about the campaign. She asked about Marcus. I talked about Marcus. She asked about the Hale account, and I talked about the Hale account, and for approximately 7 minutes I thought, maybe she's going to let it go. Maybe the 30 seconds in the office was nothing. Maybe I imagined the quiet and the look and the smile. Then she said, "How's Daniel?" I said, "Oh, good, really good. He's been great, actually." She said, "Yeah?" I said, "Yeah. He cooked Monday night, the pasta." She said, "That's sweet." I said, "It was." She looked at her salad. I looked at my salad. She said, "Are you happy?" Just like that. No preamble, no softening, just, "Are you happy?" The way only someone who has known you for 11 years can ask a question that simple and means something that enormous by it. I said, "Yes, of course." She nodded. She took a bite of her salad. She said, "You look at her like she's a problem you can't solve." I put my fork down. I said, "What?" She said, "Lara, you look at her like she's a problem you can't solve." She said it completely calmly, like she was telling me something about the weather. You get this look, like you're trying to figure something out and the answer keeps moving. I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." She looked at me. I looked at her. She picked up her fork and took another bite of her salad and said, "Okay." And then she asked me if I'd seen the new restaurant that opened near my apartment, and we talked about that for the rest of lunch, and she did not say another word about Lara, or about the look, or about the question she had just detonated in the middle of my Wednesday afternoon. She didn't need to. She'd already said it. I walked back to the office alone. Maya had a meeting across town. She hugged me at the corner, held on for exactly 1 second longer than usual, and said, "Call me tonight, okay?" And I said, "Okay." And I watched her walk away, and I stood on that corner for a moment longer than I needed to. You look at her like she's a problem you can't solve. I walked back to the office. The afternoon was difficult, not because anything happened. Nothing happened. We worked. We were professional. We discussed campaign metrics and presentation structure and the Hale brand voice, and everything was exactly as it should have been. Except I couldn't stop hearing Maya's voice. Every time Lara spoke, I heard it. Every time Lara looked at me, I heard it. Every time Lara said my name, Robbie, just like that, 2 syllables, I heard it. You look at her like she's a problem you can't solve. At 3:15, Lara asked me what I thought about the visual direction for the presentation deck, and I said I thought the navy and gold palette was strongest, and she said she agreed, and our eyes met for approximately 1 second, and I heard it so loudly that I was amazed she couldn't hear it too. I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. I said, quietly, to my own reflection, which felt appropriate, "Get it together, Robbie." My reflection did not look convinced. Marcus announced the client dinner at 4:30. He said the Hale team wanted to meet the leads on the campaign before the final presentation. He said dinner was at 7 at Olia, the kind of restaurant where the wine list was longer than the menu, and everything came in portions that looked like art and tasted like an occasion. He said both Robbie and Lara should attend. I looked at my screen. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lara look at her screen. Neither of us looked at each other. Marcus said, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I went home first to change. I told myself I was changing because it was a client dinner, and client dinners required a certain standard of presentation. I told myself that completely convincingly for about 4 minutes. Then I stood in front of my wardrobe for 25 minutes. Daniel was in the kitchen. He called through and asked if I wanted dinner before I left, and I said no, work dinner shouldn't be too late. He came to the bedroom doorway and looked at me standing in front of my wardrobe and said, "The black dress, definitely." I looked at him. He said, "You always look best in the black dress. Go with that." I put on the black dress. I told myself it was for the client dinner. Olia was exactly as expensive as it sounded. The Hale team were 3 people, all pleasant, all exactly the kind of clients who asked good questions and listened carefully and made you feel like the work mattered. Marcus was there. Lara was there when I arrived, already seated, already composed, deep burgundy blazer exchanged for something darker and more evening appropriate, her hair down in a way it hadn't been at the office, and I noticed that immediately and filed it away in the part of my brain that was apparently now dedicated entirely to cataloging things about Lara Reyes. I sat down. She glanced at me when I sat. She said nothing. I said nothing. The dinner began. Here's the thing about Lara Reyes at a client dinner. At the office she was composed and precise and slightly intimidating in a way that made people sit up straighter when she walked into a room. At a client dinner, with wine and good food, and the particular atmosphere of a place where everything was soft and amber, and the conversation moved slower than it did in conference rooms. Something shifted, not dramatically, not obviously, but she laughed once. A real laugh, not the professional acknowledgement she gave things that were mildly amusing, but an actual laugh at something one of the Hale team said. And it changed her face completely. Just for a second, just long enough. I was looking at her when it happened. Of course I was. The Hale team left at 9:30. Marcus followed shortly after. Early morning, he said, "Good work, both of you. See you tomorrow." And then it was just us, just Lara and me and the remains of a very good dinner and a wine list that had apparently made certain decisions on my behalf, because my glass was fuller than I remembered it being. We sat for a moment, in the way people sit when a dinner has ended, but neither person has moved toward leaving yet. Lara was looking at her wine glass. I was trying to look anywhere except at Lara. She said, quietly, not her office voice, something different, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Sure." She said, "Why did you stay in this city? You went to school in Boston. You had offers in New York. Why here?" I looked at her. She was still looking at her wine glass. I said, "How do you know I had offers in New York?" She said, "Marcus mentioned it once. When you were first being considered for the senior director role." She paused. "He said you turned down something significant to stay." I thought about it. The real answer. Not the professional answer I gave in interviews. I believed in the market here. I saw the opportunity. But the real one. I said, "Daniel, my boyfriend, his family is here. His whole life is here. It wasn't even really a decision." She nodded. She looked at her wine glass for a moment longer. Then she said, and her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it, "I wish I'd had something like that." I looked at her. She looked up, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw it. What was underneath all of it? The composure and the precision and the 4 words that ended conversations. Underneath all of it, there was just a person who had transferred from London 8 months ago and built her whole life around being impossible to need, and was sitting across from me at 9:45 on a Wednesday night saying, I wish I'd had something like that. I didn't know what to say, so I said, What made you leave London? She looked at me for a moment. She almost said something. Then she picked up her wine glass and said, It was time for something new. The wall went back up, just like that. We left at 10. The restaurant was on a quiet street, amber streetlights. The city doing that thing it does late at night, where it goes softer and slower, and everything feels slightly more honest than it does in the daytime. We walked to the corner where we'd both parked. Her car was closer. We stopped at the corner. She said, Good dinner. I said, Good dinner. She looked at me. I looked at her. The city was quiet around us, and Maya's voice was loud in my head, and the wine had made everything slightly warmer than it should have been, and she was standing close enough that I could have reached out and... She said, Good night, Robbie. 2 syllables. I said, Good night. She walked to her car. I walked to mine. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, just sat there, keys in my hand. City quiet outside. I thought about, I wish I'd had something like that. I thought about the laugh, the real one. Just for a second. I thought about good night, Robbie. I started the car. Daniel was still up when I got home. He was on the couch with a book. He always waited up when I had late work things. That was just who he was. That was one of the things about him that had always made me feel safe. He looked up when I came in. He said, Good dinner? I said, Really good, actually. He smiled, put his book down, said, You seem different lately. Good different, like something is making you come alive. I looked at him. He said it so simply, so warmly, the way he said everything, easy and certain and completely, without any idea of what he was saying. Something is making you come alive. I said, Just the campaign. It's going well? He nodded, said he was glad, said he was going to bed, kissed me on the cheek and said don't stay up too late, and walked down the hallway. I stood in the living room. The apartment was quiet. I thought about a woman standing under an amber streetlight saying goodnight like it meant something. I thought about my boyfriend who waited up because that was just who he was. I thought about Maya saying, You look at her like she's a problem you can't solve. I sat down on the couch in my black dress. I didn't move for a long time.